Yeah, so okay, so I can start with my small introduction then.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, so if you want to switch slide, Jeff.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so hi everyone. So welcome to our first virtual YUL identity meetup, Montreal's one and only identity and access management meetup. So for those who don't know me, my name is Jonathan, and I'm a co-founder of YUL Identity along with Rob Skozilas and Bert. I work as an identity architect at Indigo Consulting, where we provide architecture development and deployment services for customers across North America. We had started this meetup to meet professionals interested in this domain, to share information and create opportunities for those that want to work in this existing space. We had initially planned an event back in March, but since COVID hit, we were forced to reschedule and do something virtual instead. Our intent is to continue the collaboration and share knowledge specific to identity and access management with our fellow Montrealers, or when it's virtual, it can be all around the world. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter for this first virtual meetup. So, Jeff Lombardo, he's a seasoned speaker with years of experience in the industry. So it might not be his only presentation at the YUL Identity. So once Jeff wraps up the presentation, we might have a Q&A session. But since we're only like 9, maybe it will be more an ad hoc way. So Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So welcome to in-depth identity enforcement with JWAP, which I'm pretty sure for all of you, it's a very strange terminology and a very strange term. As usual, it's mainly to be sure that you are curious about it and wants to know more, but you would see that there is no novelty about all of that. It's just putting things into the right place as usual. So let's start. With that. So I'm Jean-François Lombardo. I'm a security specialist now at Expo. I have a past life of being an identity and access management consultant in France and in Canada. You can keep in touch with me through Twitter or LinkedIn if you want. I deeply encourage you to join ID Pro and also other body of knowledge that I think are of interest into Canada, like DIAC or Kantar Initiative. So this whole talk does not represent the views of any of my past or present employers, or any of the association I'm part of. It's only my view onto the subject, but I think that you will find it interesting. So let's start with security in depth. What is security in depth? In fact, there is a lot of definition for that. We all want security in depth, but usually we fall back to think we used to put in place in order to put a security perimeter around that, and then we revolve around firewall technology, or at least we try to say next-gen firewall technology. And as soon as we see a zero trust label onto one of those products, we try to acquire it. But what is in-depth security effectively? Effectively, it is a lot of resource providers that are under my management that provide services to external parties, and for which I want to control the access. So I can have multiple users that I want to consume my resources. They can delegate part of their identity to a third-party object like a phone, a car, or a house in order to consume those resources, and that's pretty much how we see in-depth security. But in fact, it is not sufficient. We put the main of the focus on managing the identity of the end users and the object that belongs to them. But we generally completely forgot what happened within our own bubble of management, what happened into the system-to-system communication, where usually we use some generic account and generic credentials in order to perform those access. And when we do that, the main issue that that we have is that a system is then very highly privileged into the next system it tries to request, because it can represent multiple contexts, multiple users, and so there is a difficulty to enforce the least privileges in those cases. So what I want you to keep in mind for the rest of the talk is that if we want to achieve in-depth security, that means that we want to do in-depth authorization. So each one of our resource provider has to enforce authorization the same way. And if we want to do in-depth authorization, then we need in-depth identity. So that's why I want to focus especially onto this aspect. So how do we do it so far? So far, it's very easy, because for everything which is related to the end user and to the client that the end user is using in order to access to the resources, we saw it through all the talks at Identiverse and through the different experience we are going through. Now we are gaining more and more maturity by using a protocol like OAuth or OpenID Connect, and in order to ensure that we handle this securely. And we can propagate pretty easily this kind of mechanism within the API gateway and within our microservices infrastructure in order to make access control into our global solution. But onto the last mile, the one which is maybe more legacy, it is far more difficult to enforce it. And as I said, it's generally a land which is governed by generic accounts that are full of privilege and fixed into the code. So that's the point I want to try to solve with the proposition of today. Because if we look, so if we look at the legacy backend that we can have, we can see that most of them are supporting technologies that are not very much entitled for delegation of identity. Usually they can support a password. That's great, but we don't have the password of the end user, or if you have it, please stop it, because that's not the way of doing things. We can support Espenigo or Kerberos as a delegation protocol, but they are pretty much heavy to enforce. It requires 3 parties to work together in order to achieve this, which can be pretty cumbersome to put in place. We can have certificates. Yeah, certificates are great, but when we want to represent end users, it might be difficult, because it means that we have to use certificates into a dynamic way with a short life for those certificates. So I'm very interested into that, but can we do it everywhere? That's, I think, very complicated. So maybe the best approach that we can have is to come back to the old faithful lightweight directory access protocol. So if we do a summary, we have a front end that are capable of consuming JWT, so JSON Web Token, or JWT. And we have backends that understand pretty much only lightweight directory access protocol. So that's where I propose to use JWT to LDAP bridge, and that's where the JWAP is coming from. So there is nothing new into all of this. As I said, it's common technologies that we are using on a day-to-day basis. The only thing that we try to achieve is just interconnect those two together. So how can we do that? it's very not complicated at all. What we can do is have a front end which follows a standard authorization grant flow from OIDC to authenticate a user and to get an access token and a refresh token from an identity provider. The next step that we have is when we do a call to a backend, we do a call by pushing these access token to the backend and asking the backend to perform a LDAP authentication using the JWAP as the user account credential against a proxy or a bridge, which I call JWAP. Okay. Any question with the flow?
So this answers a lot because I was Googling JWAP trying to figure out why the fuck don't I know about this thing. You invented it.
So I will completely answer your question at the end, but it's just a contraction of JWT to LDAP.
Sure, but it makes sense, and I was trying to figure out what you were talking about before yesterday or whatever, and I couldn't. I was like, oh God, how did I miss this?
That's the magic. That's the magic of finding a very strange meeting title just to use your curiosity to join. But again,
and it's a good name too, by the way. Like JWAP sounds like it means something important, so you did good there.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate it. So this is the flow, and just in order to ensure that you can see the value into it, I'm now calling to the demo goals in order to perform something. So I hope it will work. Just one thing you must keep in mind: I'm not a very strong developer. I don't have very strong development capabilities. My capabilities might have been stuck into the 90s, so please bear with me. So, yeah, here we are. Okay, so what we have here on this side, we have our JWAP component. So the JWAP component is just a Golang component with the LDAP interface on one side and the capability to consume a configuration endpoint at an identity provider. The identity provider that I have chosen here is just WSO2 identity provider, but I'm pretty sure that you can make this work with Ping Identity or ForgeRock or whatever the identity provider that you have into your own ecosystem. And I have just made a Node.js front end here to be able to authenticate the end user. So what will happen is that I will authenticate through my front end here, which read the configuration from my identity provider. And my front end will do some request against a PostgreSQL database in order to get some information. So if you see here into my PostgreSQL databases, I have a set of data. And this set of data is a list of people that are belonging to some different organization, and some of them might be flagged as sensitive, and others might be flagged as insensitive people information. Okay, I will come back to more details on that, but let's see if this works. So I'm going to my application. Please forgive me for not having put any HTTPS into all of that. So this is my old 90s login page. So it should not be that long. Yeah, sure. So I asked for login, so now I'm redirected to my WSO2 identity server, and I will try might be important. I will try to log with a user which belong to one of the organization. You can see that here my application received an access token that is tied to my subject. And now if I do a query from my application, you will see that this application is making a query to the database, and the database has validated the credential against my JWAP component. So I got a bind request, which is something very specific to the LDAP. So I have a user identifier which is into LDAP. And I'm using the access token as my transient password. The access token will be validated. It will be validated in terms of signature. It will be validated in terms of audience. It can even be validated along some scopes that I want to restrict as the access to. But one important point, in order to prevent any replay of authentication, it will validate that the subject which is within the token, the access token, is the exact same identifier which is passed during the LDAP bind operation. Okay.
Do you introspect the token as well against your identity provider?
No, but I'm pretty sure I can do that. It's just adding an extra step.
It would just prevent the token from being put on the deny list.
Yeah, if it's put on the deny list, then by the introspection you can see that even if it's valid by itself, it's still been revoked at the identity provider. And then you can see that I have my user which was Logan, and Logan was just entitled to see the information from the organization Argos, which is non-sensitive. Okay, so if I if I try now to do the same with the same user, with another user from the same organization. So okay, so let's call him James. I'm sorry, I didn't put into place any logout function, so that's why I have to just close my my browser. Okay, so if now I do the same kind of operation, this is a consent form for GDPR perspective for sure. If I do the same request as James, he has more rights onto the databases. You can see both the sensitive and the non-sensitive information, but he is still bound to some specific organization. He cannot see all the data that is into my database. And if now I'm going to use someone from another organization, so let's say, for example, an admin organization that can see all the data which is within the system, I can even add this into place. Okay, by using my Rutherford account. Okay, I can just have all my information, the same ones that I have into the final databases. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean. The question about the actual authorization that's happening, is that because the app itself is connecting to the database, or because you're sending that in, your authentication provider connects to the database, inserts it to the token, and that's being used by the app?
No, in fact, as I said, the database is not aware that I'm using an access token to make the access control. The database still thinks that he is talking to a LDAP repository. But in fact, the JWAP component is just returning a LDAP result code after validating the token along all the rules that I have said earlier, which is the audience, the signatures, the audience, the scope, and the subject. Okay, everything else that happens is purely within within the databases. Within the databases, I have all my users which are declared with no password attached, because I have said that the database must authenticate people against the LDAP repository, which is not existing. It is a virtual LDAP repository. I still have some roles put into place. Those roles are multiple. There are roles for organization, and there is a specific role for accessing to sensitive data. And thanks, in fact, to row level policies, I can say that if you are part of the insight role, you can see all the data from insight. Okay, and if you are only from the insight role, you can see all the data from insight, which is non-sensitive. But if you are part of the sensitive role, then you can also see the sensitive data. But because you are restricted by this rule to insight organization data, you can see sensitive and insensitive data, but only for the insight organization. So the fact that now I'm capable to having a system-to-system communication that is capable of passing the identity, then I can enforce least privilege into the databases based on those identity, and to ensure that even if it's the same front end calling the database, I can ensure the access control is really taking place based on the identity of the end user which is in front of it. Because the main issue that I have is that if tomorrow my front-end application is hacked, because I'm using today, if I'm using a service account which can impersonate all the people from inside, from Argos, and from Delos, so as write onto all the set of data, then I can access to all the information. Now, because I'm no longer using a generic account for the front end to talk to the back end, but I'm using really the end user context, this can no longer happen. This risk automatically disappear from the picture. And the fact that from a database perspective, it still sees that as just authenticating someone against the LDAP directory. For him, there is no change. It's a very old and faithful protocol, and everything is working correctly. Yes, you might have the question, and how do I flow the people into the database? For sure, it's part of the identity provisioning and synchronization in between the different components, but still, I don't have to create any password into this database, and I don't have to synchronize any password between any system. So I hope that I have demonstrated the value of that. It's a very simple example, but I think that it can bring value. Coming back to your question, so you said it seems like I made some research and you invented this. I will demonstrate to you that this is not the case. But first, I just want to restate all of this. JWT as authentication pattern, we know that it's future-proof. Okay, we know that JWT, there is a lot of mechanisms that prevent anyone from tampering with the content of the JWT thanks to the signature. We can integrate for sure audience restriction into the JWT. LDAP is a global standard and a gold standard for many of legacy apps. So that's very interesting. And the only thing that we are doing here is that we are using the access token as a dynamic transient password. Okay, and when you think that this is very innovative, this is not. In fact, there is an old mechanism that was put in place by Gmail. If you wanted to access to your Gmail email from a FAT client, initially into the beginning, what they have done is that they have inserted as a password a OAuth token into the configuration of your FAT client. And in fact, they were using onto the IMAP server an extension which was called SASL X02 that was just doing the exact same thing. It's a very old mechanism that Google was using for this purpose.
Doesn't sound as good though.
Sorry, what?
It doesn't sound as good.
I don't know. Maybe that's to you to appreciate. So JWAP does not officially exist. So that's why you didn't find anything related to that. But still, it's not. It has not been created out of vacuum. It's based on GLOT, which is a Golang LDAP, virtual LDAP component, into which I have just incorporated a JWT library, which is used by JWAP.io in order to validate the JSON token and to ensure that everything is okay. So just one. So that's the link to the different points.
So you only support the RSA tokens. Was it SHA signing? Is that what I saw there?
Yeah. So for the moment, in terms of signature, SHA is fully supported. I'm working to support the other type of signature for the token. Yeah. But for the moment, only SHA is supported. The configuration file is very simple. You can have so you can enable a debug or not. You can provide anything which is logged in terms of authentication to a syslog mechanism if you want to centralize this. You can activate the LDAP endpoint. In fact, if you don't enable it, you can do nothing. You can force it into a secure LDAP if you want, and you can provide your own set of certificate for that. And after that, it's a very simple configuration. You can set that this is a JWT repository because GLOT is supporting S3 repository or a local file repository for virtualizing the LDAP interface. And then after that, you just have to provide the discovery URL, and from the discovery URL, you will retrieve everything you need in terms of OpenID Connect configuration, and even retrieve the key set from the JWTS endpoint. Then you can restrict the audience for the tokens that are presented to you. You can even put some restriction onto the scope. I found that I might need to reformat the subject depending on how it is presented for different kind of technology. And you just have a flag to say if you are talking to this localhost endpoint with a self-signed certificate, just don't check the certificate over there because everything is okay. But in production, for sure, you will turn this to false. And that's pretty much it. The only thing that I will add to this is that, as you can see here, why did we look into this? I don't want to say at Expo, but why did I look into this? Is because we have a lot of questions around how to make a database multi-tenant and how to store data into a database for multiple of customers, and ensuring that we can protect the data accordingly to who try to access to it. And we found that this was an interesting path to follow in order to try to implement this and not have too much pressure onto the scalability of our system. give you back the mic, Jonathan. Jonathan, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so thank you. That's interesting. Anyone has any question?
That's very cool, JF. Will you share the slide after this?
Oh yeah, sure. No problem. No problem.
Awesome.
I made a recording also. Maybe we can stop the recording now if you have some specific question.